strategy,
design,
marketing,
UX,
digital.
development.
This is Agencies That Build. This show is dedicated to leaders and teams that design and deploy in the digital world. My name is Jessie, and I'm a marketer and an agency owner.
And I'm Varun. I'm not a marketer, but a coder and an agency partner.
This show is sponsored by Together We Ship.
On a mission to help agencies grow.
Rock on, we're here. So hi, Varun. What's up? Long time no chat.
Hey, yeah, it's Friday. Looking forward for the weekend. It's warm
I know.
and sunny.
I don't know when this is getting published, but all right, our guest today. Are you ready? This is a pretty epic intro. Are you ready for this?
You hit me.
Well, you know it because you're the guest. So he's created more than 100 mobile apps, custom built-in web applications, and intuitive user experience for clients like Field Museum, Roger Ebert, AccuWeather, and Tyson Foods. He's been quoted in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Fast Company, and has had a global presentations of the day on, I should have practiced. I don't know how to say.
Pachakacha. It means
There
chit
you
in
go.
Japanese.
Thank you. That one caught me. You're the author of the Sticky Note Game, which I can't wait to talk about here in a few minutes. The creator of the Inclusion Meeting Card, Forbes Chicago Business Council Chair. Right, we're not done yet. Named top 15 healthcare software companies by Mobile App Daily. You're a co-founder of Walkshop, which we're all excited to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
The CEO of Table XI, Mark Rickmeier. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Also, former resident of Melbourne, Australia, which is near and dear to my heart.
Very true. Oh man, I miss the Aussies. Wouldn't that be nice right about now to go somewhere where it's summer and it's still winter here?
Pretty much, yeah. I would take it.
You gotta work that out.
And a little Nando's chicken.
Yeah, goes really far, actually. Yeah, that'd go over really well right now.
I would take a Nando's chicken right now. For Varun, I don't know if you've been to Australia, but Nando's chicken is something that I don't even know. It's like the most delicious chicken restaurant. You can buy their like spices and shake mixes online, but it's not the same as having it in person.
I think my favorite was when we went to go see like one of the footy games being played, and we got a meat pie, and I was really curious of what is going to be in my very first Australian meat pie, and sure enough, the ingredients were just like flour, meat. Like what kind of meat? I was like, yep, this sounds healthy.
Well, the question is, did you put ketchup on it? Oh,
of course, yeah. You have to, you actually puncture it and squirt the ketchup right into the meat pie and just eat it like a big hungover mess. It's wonderful.
So good. We talked a lot about this in our prep call. I mean, one of my favorite things that we don't do often enough over here is waffles with ice cream on top. You know, I lived in the Little Italy area, and you can get a big fat Belgian waffle with a big scoop of gelato right on top. The only place I've ever seen it offered regularly throughout the entire country is Australia. So
there was something. So I come from Chicago, where like portion control is not a thing. You know, like we don't have hurricanes, we don't have tornadoes, we don't have earthquakes. We just have like lots of rampant obesity. And so like when I went to Australia, I was like, oh, these are my people, because they're like, yeah, let's put ice cream on waffles. That's a normal thing to do. So I felt very much at home down under.
It was a good experience. All right, we're not here to talk about Australia. Let's start off with our new favorite question. It's myths that you'd like to smash. So some sort of bogus strategy, misconception that you want to set straight. What I know we were talking about it earlier. You had an idea and I stopped you. I said, wait until we start recording. So now is the time, my friend. Share. What do you want to clear things up for the folks listening?
So this was an idea that I got watching a great interview with Warren Buffett, who was trying to talk about all the things he's done in his career, as opposed to Bill Gates and what he did in his career. The two are just talking back and forth, like wildly successful people. And I think the person who was interviewing was like, show me your planner. What does a week look like? And Bill Gates is like, oh, I've got my fingers in all these different things. I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing, this, and I've got all these different meetings. And and Warren Buffett's like, shaking his head, and they show Warren Buffett's calendar. It had like two things. It was like a thing on Tuesday and a thing on Thursday, and the rest he was just taking time to think and to read and to learn and to strategize. And he was like, you were doing it wrong. Like there is this myth, there's a perception that being busy, especially as an agency owner, like being busy is valuable, that you're going to get involved in sales and marketing and recruiting. You're going to do all these things, which means you're bouncing from meeting, invoice to invoice, email to email, I think that's the thing that people need to break that habit. Busy, as Warren Buffett said, busy is the new stupid. Like if you're that sandwiched between meetings and you're constantly booking up your calendar and you never protect time as the owner to really think or to read, to learn, to invest and think about where you want to go, that heads down time is really useful. But we associate value with things, meetings, emails, getting things done. And so it is a slippery slope to get all your whole calendar just jam-packed, especially when we're all trapped at Zoom and can't go anywhere anyway. Even your commute time is now taken up with meetings and calls. And so I've taken to creating blocks in my calendar that literally says busy is the new stupid. So like my team knows, like, please do not bug me. Like I will not take this call. I want to have time just to think. And there's so much value in being able to think about where you're going and how you can be doing things differently, to reflect. But we rarely protect that time. It seems like a superfluous or like not having a positive ROI thing. But like one of the most wildly successful people in the world literally only had 2 meetings all week. The rest of it, he's like, I have people that can do that work. I need to think. And so that's the myth. I think if more of us actually protected that time, not only just for wellness and just for your own like mental health, to have that dedicated time. So I've been trying to do more of that and actually doing that while walking and getting the hell away from Zoom, getting off my chair and spending some time actually walking in Chicago's freezing weather. But I think that's the thing I'm trying to get really protect, is that the mantra, and I've been thinking about this for a couple of years, and it's still a struggle, but that idea of busy is the new stupid, and just recognizing that value is not associated with production. Like you can take time to think. That's just as much as producing an email or sending an invoice or something.
It's funny you said that, because earlier today I was listening to this podcast on the power of stillness. In this busy world, how important it has even become more than ever to just pause, to just stop whatever you are doing, not only in your daily routine, but also focus on the stuff that you are doing now, and stop doing multitasking, stop doing engaging into multiple things that you are doing at that moment. Just take a pause and re-energize yourself. So I totally agree on how important that would be.
I hope people are learning that. Like there's an element of mindfulness and wellness that's becoming more mainstream. People are learning about the benefits of these things. But we do it to ourselves. I mean, think about how many times you're trying to get 8 things done at once. You've got Slack, multiple Chrome tabs open, and a cell phone with notifications going off. Like we are wiring our brains to context switch and to be multi-threaded. And it's tough because agency owners, people listening to this, I guarantee have their hands in a lot of different areas. Like you are involved, especially as a small agency, you're involved in everything. You can't delegate everything to everybody. So you're involved in sales, marketing, your highest, your biggest clients, and recruiting. Like that's the point of a small business. You have to wear many hats. But if you don't protect that time for yourself, God, you're going to run yourself into the ground and your business along with it. So that, I think, sometimes people look at their calendar like, look how busy I am. I'm like, shame on you. That's a terrible thing to brag about. I think that's a thing to really kind of be aware of.
It's an interesting struggle though too, because it's the moment you let something go, you have to trust that someone else is going to do it. I mean, it was funny, right before we hopped on today, I was chatting with Varun. I've been struggling to figure out something for a client, and we have some interns doing some work for us, and I was like, I could tell he was struggling because his work wasn't good enough, and it's trying to find the time to be able to teach and mentor and train and say, okay, here's where my expectations are, but I also need you to do this to get it off my plate so we don't have to do it. And you're at, like, the struggle is totally real, but finding those times to be able to sit and like even chunk out research on how to solve a particular problem, or and not having 850 meetings a day. And I know a lot of agency owners, they only do meetings in the morning and they're only 15 minutes or something like that. Or there's a few people I work with, like I don't take client meetings on Mondays is a good example. Very, very rarely, because Mondays like set things up for the weekday in terms of managing the schedule. But that's it.
I'm going to try and be as practical as I can, giving advice and guidance of the things I've been learning. So first thing I would say, check out a tool called Clockwise. You can set up your calendar and tell Clockwise, I want to have at least 2 times a week heads down time where I can't be interrupted, or I want to make sure I protect the lunch hour just to eat like stupid things. And it will go ahead and start blocking your calendar and putting that time on your calendar, like a virtual assistant might, just to guarantee that it will look for opportunities and make sure you don't get your day too sandwiched. If you can get that to roll out across your entire company, then you start other people thinking about how they protect, their time and proactively watch their calendar and not context switch themselves to death.
That's a great one. I think the lunchtime comment, I started doing that years and years ago when I was, working in corporate, and I found myself eating my lunch at my desk, and you find that you're eating your lunch and then it's staying as a little tire around your middle. I'm like, okay, never again. So I don't eat at my desk, even in, we're all home right now. Even at home, I don't eat in my office. I eat in the living room. I eat outside. I'll go stand in the driveway and eat a sandwich. You know what I mean? Just to like be elsewhere and not look at a screen while I eat. I have done that when it was warm.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I'm sure your neighbor's like, there she is again, the crazy lady eating her sandwich in the driveway.
Totally, I don't care. It was sunny out. It was nice. You're standing in the sun. We hadn't put the, the patio furniture out yet because it was still cold. I was like, I'm just going to stand here and eat my peanut butter and jelly in the middle of the night.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so, all right. My next question for you is, as an agency owner, what is the most fun thing? You've been doing this a while. You've had some great experience out of all of the things that you've done. What's the number one thing that you're like, oh, this is the best part for me?
So TableXI has been very generous about allowing me to experiment and have a go at things. I am given a lot of flexibility to try things that don't make any sense. And I think that's the best part about being in my seat, being the visionary in my company, is I'm allowed to explore and try things and have a go at things. That's a reference, by the way, to a process we have called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. So that's a big thing that we've rolled out. But I think, this is the company that allowed me to create a conference that aids my direct competitors. I allowed to create a card game, like a physical card game that allows me to think about facilitating things differently. We created the walk shop and helped think about ways of getting as far away from technology as possible. Like the amount of analog experiences that my digital company has allowed me to invest time in has been wonderful. So I think the thing that I think is the best about this is the ability to experiment and have a go at something, not always knowing where the immediate ROI is going to be, but I know that there's energy and passion behind it. And invariably those things do return and bring value back to the company. So I really like that, the experimentation mindset that is very alive and well at TableXI means a lot to me. I think having that space to fail and be like, that's okay, you can learn from that as long as you own it. And that the ability to experiment and recognize that failure is possible, that innovation path. There's a certain amount of freedom that comes from that. And so I think that's the thing I get most excited about. You always think about, what is your exit plan? And if someone were to buy TableXI and I had to report to someone and not have that ability to experiment and try a crazy idea, like that would be soul damaging, I think, to never have the ability to lean into innovation and experimentation the way that we do. So I think there's a great value in that. And that's a great thing. Small businesses, typically, if you don't have a lot of like outside venture capital, if you've been building yourselves up as we have been, you're in control of your own destiny, and you can think about experiments you want to try and lean into that.
So flexibility and freedom is a great point. I think a lot of agency owners think to start the company thinking about that, right? They want to start their own business because that's what they want. But do they get that? At what point do they get that in their life? That's something I'm curious to hear. Like you are like 50 people company now, like how so 50 plus, right? Now, and you talked about EOS. So I want to talk about that, right? On the process side, when did you start working on EOS, or have you implemented it yet?
Yeah, we've been doing it for years. I think we're like 6-7 years in, but it was a response to a massive chaotic incident that occurred. So I always feel like I give very long answers, but this is a good story at least.
No. Can you define EOS for those of us who aren't as familiar with both of you?
Sure. So it stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It was popularized by a book called Traction, but basically it's a framework for how you can set up and run a small to medium business. So if people are in the business of software, there's probably like an Agile Playbook they use to run projects. Think of this as a playbook for running a company. Cool. And it has some very strong opinions on what to do and things not to do. So I used to joke that TableXI in its early days was powered by red wine and Thai food. Like we would do our billable work throughout the day, and then at night we'd order in Thai and pour a glass of wine and be like, all right, what's broken? What do we need to fix? Recruiting, great. Let's everyone talk about recruiting simultaneously. And it was like a council of elders trying to get together to fix something, which was exactly as efficient as it probably sounds like it was. It was very inclusive, but there was no clear accountability. We would get together and do this monthly, which meant that people would ignore their stuff for 3 weeks straight and then scramble to get all their tasks done. And the week before, there was no real clear direction of who's doing what. So everyone was jumping into things that really weren't their expert area or expertise area. EOS tries to bring a lot more focus to a management team by having very clear accountability, having guidance on like cadence when you get together, things that you should be doing quarterly, things you should be doing weekly. Monthly is a stupid cadence. Like you should not be meeting with your team monthly. Nothing happens that way. So they had a lot of opinions on how to structure a team and what the accountability should be and how you start taking things like values and making them feel real, not like motivational posters on a wall. How do you start establishing the culture that you want to have? So that was a very important move for us, was to adopt EOS. And it was born out of the fact that we had a very dangerous thing happen in 2012. So there was one metric that can kill a business in our line of work faster than any other. I'll be curious, like if there was one metric you think that could really destroy a business, what do you think it would be?
Or revenue?
Yeah.
Nope. You can have low revenue for a while. That's not that problematic.
Employee attrition?
People.
People, yeah, you could slowly lose people, but you can borrow people, you can hire, you can always contract. Like that won't kill you overnight. Cash, and think about a lack of cash. If you don't have cash in the bankroll, like that can kill you overnight. And what happens is that early days, especially small agencies, have a metric called client concentration risk, or CCR. Is one of the most important things to look at. Basically, it's a measurement of how many eggs do you have in one basket. So imagine you're a small agency owner. You've got one really big account in Carnival Cruise Line, and 2020 happens, and you go from having like 70% of your revenue and all your cash from one client goes away overnight. You're dead. If you have an overabundance of client concentration risk, it can kill you literally within a quarter. Whereas like attrition won't kill you in a quarter, low revenue won't kill you in a quarter. Like you can build on those things, but cash is obviously king. They say that for a reason. And client concentration risk is something that everyone adopts in their early marketing or early agency days. You generally have like 1 or 2 anchor accounts. That's how you build. In our history, we had one client that was over 50%. That's a huge concentration risk. And it was not a good relationship. And so we decided to exit our biggest client in 2012, not realizing the impact it was going to have before we had EOS. And everything else became an issue. So this client paid most of our bills. So now we had a collection issue. We found out everyone else was slow paying us, and we didn't really focus on that before. They were our biggest revenue by far. And whenever we hired more people, they would just hoover them right up into their projects. So now we had a pipeline problem. We never had to really focus on sales before. We had people on the beach for the first time. We had a utilization problem. The only thing we didn't have was a morale problem. Everyone was very happy to move past this really terrible client. But EOS was a response to the fact that we really needed to think about how do we get better accountability and more efficiency in running the business and watch out some of those key metrics.
How big were you at that time when you adopted
high teens,
EOS?
low 20s, I want to say.
Okay. So do you think that is the right time? I mean, so your need to EOS was not based on the number of people or how big you were. It was a specific incident that happened. Then at that time you adopted that.
That and the fact that it felt like it wasn't very efficient. Like I said, what we lacked in experience, we more than made up with enthusiasm. It was a lot of great discussion over red wine and Thai food, but like it wasn't the most efficient way of running a business. And we needed to get efficient very quickly. Like we didn't, when you fire your biggest client, you got to, and we didn't want to let anybody go. We didn't want to have layoffs or anything. We wanted to move past that quickly. We needed to get very efficient, which means clear accountability, clear ownership, better direction. And so a great tenet of EOS, for example, is that one person can do 2 things, but 2 people cannot do 1 thing, which means I can be both a visionary and the head of sales, but I can't have 2 people be head of sales. We have to have one person saying, I've got the accountability for where we're going to go target clients. And so in that case, what we used to do is like everyone would swarm around one topic at a time, which was super inefficient. And you want to have that clear accountability so that person can be thinking about that and really focusing on that. Again, focus is a big part of what is often denied agency owners because they're so stretched thin. One of the best things the EOS does is get you to focus on your accountability and delegate things to other people who can focus on their accountabilities. So I happen to be a big EOS fan. We've rolled it out, like I said, about 6-7 years ago. I've introduced it to most of my peers, my friendly competitors in the space, and I think a lot of people have gotten value from that.
Yeah.
And it has been one of the best things we've done to get, I think they call it traction for a reason. We got more traction in our business, just making sure we could grow and scale more efficiently.
Yeah. And your organization, do you have partners, or you are the only sole owner?
No, I'm not even the biggest owner. So I joined the company as the COO back in 2011. So that my first year was trying to recover from the fact we just fired our biggest client. That was fun. So
Welcome
I became,
to the party.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, yeah, you're here, help sort us all this
Here.
out. And so I became the CEO about 5 years ago. And so I am one of the people who owns the business, but we have the regional founders and owners, and recently some of our employees have becoming owners as well, which is really great to diversify the ownership to the people who are actually doing the work.
Yeah, the reason I asked was because EOS is something we are trying to implement as well, and we are at 400 people right now, and we by no means we are thinking of having it implement company-wide. I mean, it will take years for us, but the challenge we are having is right now we are partners, but I know agency owners who are partners, and sometimes it's not clear between the roles who is going to take the visionary and integrator role. Sometimes they overlap. So that's why I asked. In your case, you clearly said that you are the visionary, but when you started, was it very clear, or did you made it such that no, I am going to be the visionary, irrespective of if I can do some integrator role or not, but I am the one who is going to take the visionary role. No one else will do that.
No, it wasn't clear. Like that's one of the hardest things is knowing what your real skills are. Like I was I was an okay integrator. I was like a B- integrator. Like I wasn't great at that. And what we found, actually, I created my partner for this. He was the original founder and the original CEO. Is we had two people who were like kind of visionaries trying to figure out where the company should be going, and no one was doing the integrator job very well. And our line of work, he was very aware of what his skills were, what he wanted to do, and he liked being entrepreneurial. He liked building things. He was much more of a 0 to 1. I want to start things. And TableXI was well beyond that. At that point, we're now at 25 people and growing and building, which is more the things I got excited about. So he actually left to become a CEO of one of our smaller healthcare clients and really got back to the scrappy entrepreneurial roots and gave me the CEO spot. And then I got people to jump in to become the next integrator. And so it was an evolution for us. But yeah, that pairing, that visionary integrator pairing is the most important to get right. And I was hired to be that integrator, and I was like, I was okay, but I wasn't the one we needed. And I think that was also a realization is, figuring out what I'm good at, what I'm not, and bringing in people that could frankly do a far better job than I could in that role.
Yeah.
When you were exploring kind of your own skill set, now I'm going off in a left field, so bear with me for a minute. In various corporate roles that I've held, you've had, Myers-Briggs tests, you've had DISC assessments and stuff like that. Is there anything that you use as a tool to kind of understand where your role is? Some of us are lucky and know skills, and some of us are a little bit, I've done 1,000,001 Myers-Briggs, and I end up in the middle all of the time. I'm like, that's not useful.
Yeah, you're like,
so again, how does that help me?
There have been some things that tell me more about like my personality. I think that's always interesting. The one that I actually focused on that helped me more than anything else was less about who I am as a person, but more like jobs to be done, what brings me energy. And so it was an exercise called Delegate and Elevate, where you think about like, what are the things I typically do? And you break up a grid into things I'm good at that I like, things I'm good at that I love, things I'm not good at that I like, and then you kind of look at this and things like I'm not good at and that I hate. So like, obviously those are the things you shouldn't do. But like, I noticed I was not good at writing contracts, and I didn't like doing it. I wasn't good at it. So we do a whole project, the project we finish, and the contract still wasn't done because I just hated all the legalese. And it was like a handshake agreement the entire time, which is so stupid. So I was like, all right, I should have nothing to do with contracts. I love sales. I just don't want anything to do with contracts. Then there were things I liked, but I was like, okay at doing it. And what you really want to do is get the stuff that you love and you're really great at, the things that bring you energy. It doesn't even feel like work anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think rather than trying to be like, am I introverted or extroverted? Like there are some things about my personality which are good to know for the people I collaborate with. But in terms of where I focus my time, I try to focus more on the observable behavior of what brought me energy and what didn't, and talked more about those skills. Those jobs to be done than personal like attributes of my
Yeah,
personality.
rather less personality tests, more.
Yeah, I think like, and those are all valuable, but I think it didn't help me figure out like what I should be holding on to and what should I get rid of.
Totally. Well, it's interesting because it's different, you know, in a much more traditional business and agency versus regular business environment. Personality tests when you're trying to figure out roles and responsibilities among executives is one thing, versus in an agency, you're trying to figure out how do we get all this stuff done and how to parse it out and things like that. So it's interesting.
I think sometimes there's a desire to like not let go of stuff until you're bigger. Like, oh, we can't hire a marketing person until we get bigger. We can't hire an HR person until we get bigger.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, I would say that's
hire HR real quick.
I would, yeah, there are certain people I'm like, you will just
And a
benefit from having a
CFO.
person and get some of those people in place. Yeah, like that was one of the best things we ever did, was bring in someone who could be not a part-time CFO, but someone who could really run that part of the business.
Yep.
Every time we've gotten rid of someone's going to do this part-time and brought in someone to own that, it's been like, you know, a next leap in our evolution. Do that before you think you need to.
True. All right, I want to pivot back to your earlier point you mentioned when you started EOS, because you had a very big risky client. When you started the business, the agency, how were you positioning yourself? Because that is one thing that agency owners really struggle with. Like, we are full service, we focus only on one domain, one industry, one tech stack. How did you, like, what did you do when you were 15, 20 people, and how did that change over time now when you are 50 people company? If you can share some experience there.
It's changed a lot, I think. And so that's one of the things, again, with a company that based on strongly, experimentation principles, you see our services evolve as the market evolves, as our clients evolve. We started as a strategy company, not a development one. And so we believe that trust was harder to build than technology, and we would come in as a digital consigliere of sorts, or CTO, service for hire, advising them on, do you buy versus your build? And if you're going to build, what languages, what frameworks, that kind of thing. And clients would ask like, okay, well, can you help us build that? And we would say, no, like, we're a strategist, go hire developers for that. Like, that's not what we do. And we realized while we were building this trusted relationship and we wanted to stay engaged, we just didn't have the bench strength early on. It's like we could do the work, we just didn't have the people. So we pivoted and started hiring more developers. And then, clients would say, well, we have a strategy and you're building this thing now. Can we put it into production? Can we host it? Can we monitor it? And we would say, no, we're a dev shop now. Like, go hire an sysadmin for that. And think about if something happens in the middle of the night and site goes down, we'd point our fingers at a sysadmin saying, hey, it's configured wrong. They'd point back, be like, no, you built it wrong. And our clients wouldn't know or care. And so we had to think about, okay, we got to start taking on some DevOps type work. This is before AWS made our life a lot easier, but had to carry pagers and have racks of servers and worry about uptime and redundancy and resiliency and privacy and security, and like all the things that go into a hosting maintenance monitoring practice. And that worked, I would say, for a little while until we started working with storytellers. And so you mentioned Roger Ebert and the Field Museum and people like that, Pachakacha. I appreciate the attempt to mention that because it's a great client in Japan. Storytellers have a different need entirely that totally broke Table XI. At that point, we were strategy, DevOps. And so everything looked like it was designed by a bunch of developers because it had been. Like that wasn't the thing that we had. And storytellers don't care about the back end as much. They care about, Roger Ebert would assume the site would handle heavy load and traffic. What he cared about was how quickly can someone find a review? How usable is this site? How quickly can I get to that right piece of content? The Field Museum had like 3% or something of their archive is displayed. Everything else is all this amazing research that they do. And so all this content was really important. And that's why we needed to start working with and would pair with design firms that were really good at what they did until 2011, and the browser changed. And now it's all responsive and you got to start thinking about a digital design, and you got to start worrying about mobility. People are working on their phones more than on their laptops anymore. And so we ended up acquiring, what's that?
Tablets screwed everything up.
Everything, yeah. And if you were working mainly with marketing designers or branding designers that couldn't understand the change in the responsive nature or the limitations of the browser.
No, I can't put this next to it. It doesn't work because it won't, I live in that world. Sorry.
That was a big pivot for us, I think, was actually acquiring a design firm in 2012 and starting to build design more and more into the way that we think. And so we went from being this dev shop kind of and DevOps kind of place into a space where we're now doing more design thinking. And so broad brushstrokes, the beginning of the service offering was around how do you build the thing right? So heavy focus on back-end scalability and on the architecture of the thing, iterative development, agile processes, all of that. But the last 8 years have been trying to expand beyond how do I build the thing right to how do I build the right thing? And so this is where you start adopting design thinking and getting to know the needs of the user and helping them to figure out what the right problem is before you identify a solution or get too attached to a solution, and you do more prototyping. I think there's been a big pivot in our space towards what we call product innovation, which is more, we're not going to come in with a very expensive PowerPoint deck and say, good luck. Like, we're not IDEO, we're not just strategy only, but we're also not trying to be cognizant where you have like a large offshore team who needs all the requirements spec'd out and they'll deliver that spec. Like, we like coming up with the idea and the strategy, but then having the team that can go execute on it. And so it's been a gradual pivot every couple of years as we think about our evolving service offerings from strategy only to dev only to strategy, dev, DevOps. And then with the adoption of a different kind of client, seeing how design and design principles can change that from being like a dev shop into this kind of product innovation company. And it's been a very gradual evolution, I would say, over 18 years.
Yeah, so it's great to hear. I'm curious to know more, because many companies or many smaller agencies would think to go on that path, but the challenge they face is in this question, in the dilemma of, when I want to scale, should I hire someone right away? Should I start with contractors? Should I how should I scale my growth so that it's sustainable, it's not risky,
Sure.
and it doesn't put, so when you are thinking like, and that thought may change after COVID, because COVID has changed, the style, the work life for everybody. So people are already thinking remote, they may not go back to office and all that. So I'll ask that later, but for now, when you were smaller, how did you approach your growth? Were you always, we need everybody in-house. If we are doing this, it has to be our team, otherwise we won't go. I mean, how were you addressing that?
It's a good question. I don't think I had the right mindset when I first joined. I would hire only when I had a need that I couldn't fill. So you're very reactive hiring as opposed to just finding good people and then finding work for them to do. I feel like you should always be trying to hire good people, whether you have an open role or not, or an open need or not, because you can always it'll encourage you to find honestly better work. So I think I used to do it more reactionary in time. But I looked at this, and so when we lost, we removed our biggest client from the portfolio. And that's when we realized we needed to rethink a lot of the ways we were doing things. We took an atypical approach to this. So I wanted to see how other companies were solving these ridiculously difficult challenges. Like, running a business of our size is a very difficult thing. You're always trying to balance somehow like sales and recruiting. It seems like that's always what you're doing. Do I have enough work or do I have enough people? You oscillate back and forth. And so I started this thing called OpsComp, which is a connection to some of the best agencies in the world that did what we did. So professional services firms that were, between 20 and 200 people. So no Accenture type, huge companies, and no independent contractors either, that were all in professional services, that were all in custom software, that had the background, that understood when I talk about things like agile and design thinking, but they also understand things like utilization and forecasting and the things that go into a services business. And we flew in, people got all together. I rented a house in South Carolina, then had to rent out 2 other ones, because thankfully everyone I invited basically said yes and came together to talk shop about how they did things. And I reference that only because it changed how I started thinking about this. I used to always try to balance those 2 areas. Like, do I hire now or do I wait? And what we ended up doing was just always trying to do the best, I get the best work we could. And if we were ever oversold, I now had this amazing group of friendly competitors. I could say, I have a project I can't staff. Does anyone have someone on the beach and they can join my team? That was a watershed moment, I think, for every one of us in the industry to start looking at and kind of living in this OpsComp community. Because now if I have a developers on the bench or on the beach, they get to pair with another company and see how they do things. Or if I'm oversold, I get to borrow help and learn how they do things. It's disgusting in Chicago for a good 6 months out of the year. And so now I have the opportunity to do international dev exchanges and have people work from other cities, to work in Europe or Costa Rica or Uruguay. Like, you get this amazing overflow network of people, and you get to see how they all work and how they engage and learn for their team. So I'm a big believer of this idea of cooperation, where your direct competitors can actually provide you immense value. And I think one of the things I really leaned into early in my career at TableXI was building that network of trusted peers that I could, rather than stress out about trying to hire someone immediately for the project that starts next week, borrow the help when I need it. And while I'm always taking time to recruit, recruiting can't, turn on a dime. But that's been a huge change and huge benefit for us, that I think even in last year in pandemic, I want to say 7 different companies were working for TableXI with us at one point. And I had like 2 or 3 people that were working for other companies at one point. I really believe in this model of cooperation and directly working with peers in the industry / competitors.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to something you mentioned earlier, which comes down to the trust and building that, the relationship. We've talked a lot in this podcast about relationships and networking and how to do that and who to meet and, and how to kind of build that up. And that's, one of the reasons that I think Varun, you and I have such a good time on this podcast, because it's so interesting to hear everybody's, the value that we put on meeting people and the value that we put on building these trusted relationships, even in coming from I know I've talked a lot about coming from a corporate environment into the agency world, back and forth over the years. It's just so interesting how the agency world, we work our little butts off. Like, I'll say that, and I think everyone would agree with me on that. But it's you're not going at it. I love that what's the word that you said?
Cooperation.
Yeah. I don't know if I could re-say that. You've got a lot of words I cannot pronounce today. It's pretty good.
Gotta keep you on your toes.
Yeah. But I think that's totally it. Like, that's the secret sauce, the ingredient that you're missing in other industries, is where there's enough work for all of us. Let's figure out how to do good work, because that's what drives the motivation there. Trust each other, not to screw each other over.
And I think that's one of the most important, honestly, of all the things I'm proud of, I think the creation of OpsConf may be one of the best ones. TableXI is an amazing company that does great work. But by creating OpsConf, we started building that trust with other companies, and like making sure that everyone saw that like it is a business. And I've lost projects to other people in OpsConf. We've had other OpsConf companies actually acquire each other. People have moved back and forth. Like, you get it, there's competition, but there's so much value in learning from people and seeing how they do things. I think if you can so that was the very first year we said, when we all got together, and everyone was kind of looking like, what are we here for exactly? What is this all about? And so I went first. I was like, here's the things I know how to do really well. P.S. I just fired my biggest client and I have no idea how to do all these other things. And other people were very good about, okay, here's what you should do first, and here's how I can help you. And the first rule we had was, that first year, you don't have to share financials and you don't have to do anything else. But if someone calls you on the bat phone, like, hey, I need help, you got to get back to them in 24 hours. And that was it. And from that began that trust, that relationship building initially it was between, operators and CEOs. And then as people started collaborating more, then developers started meeting each other and designers started meeting each other. And so we're actually having to rename it, because it's, OpsConf sounds like an operations conference, a thing that happens once a year. It is straight up a community at this rate. Like, people are in Slack talking all the time, sharing leads, sharing advice, getting help. It's been one of my favorite things to see evolve. But I agree with you. There's enough of that work going around, and you shouldn't come at these relationships with kind of gloves up of like, they're going to steal my secret sauce. They're going to steal my way of doing things or my people. If you can lean into that trust and build in those connections, there's so much to be learned by pairing with your competitors. There's a great book called The Infinite Game. Are you familiar with that? Simon Sinek?
By Simon Sinek, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. One of his there, and he talks about ways people should be thinking about running a business. And one of them is this idea of worthy rivals.
Yeah.
I love that I have competitors that are phenomenal and challenge me and keep, I love when I see like I'm going up against things. I'm like, I'm gonna have to work my ass off to win this project. But it also means I get to learn from them and get the advice from them. So some of the best people I know in our industry are in OpsConf, and we get together, once a year, back when humans could see each other, and like get that sense of inspiration. It is one of my favorite things to do.
You talked, so much about OpsConf and how it has changed and helped your business. I would be curious, so for other people, like, is this open to everybody? How do people join? Like, how can they become part of this community and can leverage the learnings that you are sharing with each other? I
think so. OpsConf is a small group of people that we've been. It's about 30 different companies right now across a couple different countries. It is something that we have been protective of, because we don't want it to be 500 companies and things. We like having a small group of people that can really go deep with each other. And it's pretty heavily vetted. So we make sure that clients have, the people are coming in rather, have the right values, similar size, similar challenge, but we have a very strong ethical code of conduct of how we want people to behave because you are competitors. But I think while OpsConf is a pretty closed community that way, there are, so the Bureau of Digital has created a series of these things like Owner Camp, and there's I think Agency Camp and other things you can go to meet people at a larger scale. What I liked about the OpsConf model is that it's not a for-profit thing. Like TableXI has created this as a way to help each other out and build this group in our space. But it's not like a for-profit center. So when we charge money to go to the event, it's to cover the cost of the food and the house rental. We're not trying to profit on someone else's mistakes. And so for me, it's been very important to have a very like Gettysburgian approach, kind of for the community, by the community kind of aspect. There are places you can go to that literally bring agency owners together. I think it's a more expensive thing because it's actually like for-profit enterprise that they're running, but I've heard great things about it as well. So there are other ways I think you can tap into a community or start a thing like this. Like this was a grassroots thing that I did 6-7 years ago that's been hugely valuable to all of us. And I think that the right companies will appreciate that sense of inspiration rather than fear of competition.
Yeah, no,
I like the targeted approach that you have to it too. I'm just, I think one of the things that has cropped up during our home time this past year, I'll call it that, is a lot of these niche communities who have gotten bringing people together that you would never meet normally. There's a lot of, selfishly, there's a lot of women's ones that I've joined recently. There's a big one. There's a lot of marketing targeted ones. There's a lot of location-based one, but there's a lot of people who are industry focused and they focus on some of these things. And I think it's really cool to see the craving, I'll call it that, of people to be able to connect with like-minded folks to learn and evolve and grow from each other. You were a little ahead of the curve with this sucker, but it's nice to see that it's, there's space for it. Going back to your conversation earlier about finding space for thinking, there needs to be space for learning and networking. I just keep thinking back to my years of corporate, you'd go, there were a couple of networking events every year, marketing conferences that you attend that would be so fun. And you see your people and you meet, but you don't have any other time to kind of digest and evolve. And I know it's a cool little entity you've built. I
agree. I think that, well, thank you for saying that. I think you're right. People are seeing the value in this. And I'd like to think that people now understand the value of having that peer group more than ever before. And I think something like this is different than you would see at like a Vistage, which is also very valuable to get insights from outside your community. But there's nothing quite like talking to people who know exactly what you're going through, like literally your direct competitors.
Totally.
Who understand exactly the challenges of diversity and recruiting and utilization and planning and forecasting, like all the things that go into running an agency. So if people don't have that kind of thing, I would definitely look up Bureau of Digital. I think they do great events, and I would think about leaning into that sense of cooperation.
Certainly. All right, a couple more questions on this line, and then I want to ask you about some of the other stuff that you've done. So the first one I have is, what keeps you up at night as an agency CEO? You're a little bit of a larger organization than the folks we normally talk to. I'd be curious, since you've gone through some of these roller coaster rides and things like that. Right now, today, what do you, when you go to bed tonight, are you going to be, what are you thinking about? What's kind of gnawing at you?
I think for us, we've always had so company culture has been extremely important to TableXI over the years. And we've always been very intentional about how we foster that. So one of the things when we built out our space, gosh, was that 8 years ago now? We thought about what's the best way we can encourage people to show up at work, be effective, and not always be so behind the keyboard they can't learn from other people. And so we broke out a big part of the office to build in an amazing custom kitchen, ovens, all the ductwork. We made like a commercial grade kitchen. We hired a chef, and we're going to make meals every day. So you're encouraged to step away from your keyboard and eat together and cook together. And like the whole office smells wonderful, like 11:45. Our clients will come and eat lunch with the team. Like it seems like a ridiculous expense, especially when we were down to 10, 15 people. Be like, yep, one of those 15 is a chef. But it made for an amazing opportunity to break away from the desk and catch up and talk to people. And now, in the last year alone, we've hired someone in Aberdeen, Scotland, in Colorado, in Canada, in New York. We have people across the country, across the world, and they can't get together with the chef. They can't hang out. And of course, it hardly matters right now. Nobody can. So our chef has been amazing at pivoting. We went and created our own at Table XI. We created our own like farm to table XI experience where he'd deliver food to our clients and to deliver food to our employees. And food has been a very strong part of our company culture. But I think we're recognizing, as many have, that the needs of space are different than they maybe used to be. We used to have an office space. We don't need an office space. We might need an event space. We might need a facilitation space, but rows and rows of desks, we don't need that anymore. And so thinking about what space means to us, and for a company that invested so intentionally in the space to foster the culture that we want, we have to think about other ways to foster that culture when people can't share space together. And as great as Zoom is and Slack is, it's not a replicate for that ability to share space. So I think what's keeping me up at night now is we now, hopefully, fingers crossed, pandemic will be getting behind us. We will have vaccines. We'll have the ability to gather. And I think I'm now trying to think about what is the purpose of space and how do we use that effectively, that people can work from home. All of us have seen some benefits in doing that. But I think there's a sense of isolation that's come with it as well. So I don't think it's a problem of working from home. It's working from home during a pandemic when you can't leave the house. And
Yeah,
so
totally.
how do we think about space going forward? Which is kind of like a meta question. And then how do we think about other cultural ways to stay connected when you can't rely on the space to be an advocate for that? All culture is built by two things: rituals and storytelling. And we got to think about new rituals that will allow people to connect when they can't connect over food like we used to. And ways that they can engage and talk and do and tell stories about what they're working on, or tell stories about what they did over the weekend. There's lots of ways humans need to connect. And so I think we're trying to think about what's the next wave of what that looks like to foster a company whose culture is as strong as Table XI's, so we don't lose that sense of, that belonging sense.
Yeah, the
So
water. Oh, sorry. I was just going to make a really bad Boston joke. I was going to say the water bubbler for those, there's no water bubbler conversations, for those listening, water bubbler is a fountain, drinking fountain.
Yeah.
Sorry, real bad Boston joke in there. Go ahead, Varun.
No, I just make a comment though. So it sounds like, after COVID, that has definitely changed the way you're going to work, and you're thinking you're not going to back to in-person space, and it's going to be mostly remote as much as.
I think we'll have some space. I don't think we'll be fully remote, but the space that we do have will have a different orientation towards facilitation, towards team space, towards collaboration space. I just don't think the office space in the traditional sense of what we maybe had before will come back for us.
Are you excited about that? Do you think it opens doors for you to, yes, it impacts the culture, but do you think, is it going to be good for the business, or it will impact?
I think it allows me to think about things differently. And I always think that's a good thing. It allows me to think about how can I use this constraint to get more creative. So I'll give you an example of how things got a lot better because of this forced constraint. So we have a ritual, as I said, rituals and storytelling, very important. One of our rituals is something called an all hands, where we all get together every 3 months. And typically what we do at an all hands is say, what do you want to hear about? An AMA, ask me anything. What do you want to talk about? Now, imagine you're a CEO and you want to know what's on everyone's mind. In a pre-pandemic world, what I would have done is walk into the kitchen, have lunch with folks, and be like, what should we talk about next week? And I would hear from people that are eating lunch that day, but I'd miss the people that were working from home, or I'd miss the people that were distributed. But I get like 80% of the people, which is like indicatively good enough, theoretically. Now pandemic hits and I can't work anymore, so what would I do? I would realize I can't bump into people, so I'd send a survey. It's like, what do you want to talk about? And then as a survey, I would get like individual people's responses, right? So Varun, I hear from you, and Jesse, I hear from you, and I'd have to look at all those responses and parse them and figure out what are the things that are most frequently mentioned. That's what we should talk about. The problem is that you lose the ability to see each other's stuff, right? Like I get to see everyone's responses as the person who sent the survey, but individually, you don't get to see each other's ideas. And so that was like, I would say, a good like amateur way of hearing what's going on when I was early in the pandemic. Now I'm thinking about how can I more effectively hear what's going on when I don't have the luxury of having everyone together. And so this has forced me to think of new creative ways of doing that. So are you familiar, for example, with a tool called Thought Exchange?
What exchange?
It's called Thought Exchange, the tool. Have you heard of this before?
I have, but I don't know if I know more than the fact that I've heard about it.
If I share my screen, will that work? Do I have the ability to do that? And actually,
Sure.
I think it's interesting to consider what, how could we do things differently? I think that's the really, I think, creative opportunity we all have now, is to look at things and do them in a bit different approach. So if you were in that position,
just one before you share screens, if people are listening, they can't see it. So we'll just have to make sure you verbalize whatever you're.
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
So in a thought exchange, what you do is you ask an open-ended question, just like I would have done in a survey, just like I would have done in the kitchen. What should we talk about next week?
Yeah.
And you'll answer it. But afterward, what you'll see is everyone else's answers anonymously. And you can upvote and be like, ooh, I didn't think of that. That's a good idea. We should talk about that. But this other one, like, that's not that important to me. And so you start actually interacting on each other's ideas. When we did this, I saw, of course, what do you think the number one thing would be to talk about right now? Everyone's biggest idea is office space. What are we doing with the space? When do we move back into the space? We can get a new space? Like, you would look at this and think, this is the most important thing. It was the most frequently mentioned. This is what it would look like if it was a survey. Everyone wants to talk about space. Second to last, mental health and burnout. One person mentioned it, not that important. If I was looking at just survey results, I would say office space is the number one thing by an order of magnitude what we should be talking about. But when you do a thought exchange, you don't just see what was most often said, you say what was highest voted. So if I change the axis and say, show me the things that people looked at, now it's quite a different picture. Office space is close to the bottom, but second from the top is mental health and burnout. Only one or two brave people had the guts to talk about, like, hey, I'm really struggling right now. But when everyone saw that, they're like, yeah, that's real. I feel that. That's the thing we should be talking about as a business. When I look at this, the highest thing we had, the highest voted thing, we had a great year last year, and now we're trying to grow even more. Can we please talk about burnout and mental health? That's a gutsy thing for someone to say.
Totally.
But by leaning into different ways of engaging, as a CEO, I have the opportunity to hear things I wouldn't have heard. I would not have heard this in the kitchen, nor would I have heard it in the survey. But because I'm distributed, I have to think about a different way of listening. And if you can think about pivoting your patterns of behavior, you can actually do things in a way you couldn't have done when you were all together. And so, like, this was a really healthy conversation that we had, because we started thinking about other ways of engaging remote employees. Does that make sense? Like, the things that you used to do, the crutches you used to have, aren't as good as maybe new ways of working. And I think this will force all of us to think about other ways of hearing each other.
Well, and that particular topic in general, I think one of the struggles, this is, I think, for everybody, regardless of agency, but as a working human, is how do you balance life? And the ways that you used to balance it are different. When you're working in an office, there was a time where you had to get in the car and drive home, or you had to leave the building and facilitate your transportation to your house, whether that's feet or something on wheels or other mode of transportation, broomstick or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like, how do you deal with the de-stressors? Like right now we have
right? Like, you used to have a commute to decompress, and now you've got 10 seconds between being CEO and dad. Like, it's a really hard decompression.
Yeah. Or even just like, your commute to We the Joke in the morning is we both drink coffee, and it's big football fans in this house. So we're watching a lot of the coverage because it's free agency right now. So there's a lot of stuff happening. I'm totally, nerding out. So we're watching, sports news in the morning, and so it's like, okay, see you later. I'm going to commute. Okay, me too. And we go to respective offices, and it's, in the evening, we found that we both need to like ignore each other for an hour before you dive in and you go and, talk about something else, or you deal with what, the question is, if you ask me what's for dinner, I'm going to, bite your head off. Like, I don't even want to talk about it right now. So that's a really interesting chart for those of you who are watching the video. And for those of you listening, I think you did a nice job verbalizing it. So great. I know you have a couple of other, I just want to ask you about one, you have your meetings done right. You've ops conf, we talked about workshop. I want to ask about the sticky note game. As we kind of pivot here for a minute, can you tell us what that is? Where does the idea come from? The creator of the sticky note game?
Yeah. So I'll answer a question with a question. If you're onboarding someone, what do you think is the most important thing to do in an onboarding process? What makes for a really good onboarding?
Oh, you're asking hard questions today. I like it. I think for me, onboarding someone is, not having them drink from a fire hose. It's like introducing them to pieces so they understand it and they can feel, I think, making sure you're setting up clear goals and they can feel success very, very quickly. There needs to be a positive association with the brand or the company, that you're giving them a task and they've achieved it very quickly in that first week or so.
Yeah, I would add them. I would associate them with a buddy. I think that is super important. That they need somebody, who they can reach out to. That is for us. We do that, more often than not, because it's super important.
I think elements of what you both said, that's how I started our program as well. So you mentioned not drinking from the fire hose. There's so much you have to learn when you go to a new company. And so I would focus on context. I thought that was the most important thing. So I tell them about the history of the company and like where our ridiculous name came from and like what the history is, how we fired our biggest client and moved past that, like all the lore and the stories that explain how, who we are. I thought that's what made up for the best onboarding. And then to your point, I started thinking about, well, gosh, context only gets you so far. We really need to pivot and focus on belonging. And so that's when you get the idea of like having a buddy and having someone that can like walk you around, introduce you to people, explain why and how we do things. So you're not all on your own. You get the company swag and you get all the things that make you feel like you're part of a new team.
Yeah.
I don't mean to, like both of what you just said are very important. I think context and belonging are the cornerstones of most people's onboarding. But Jesse, you mentioned something else, which I think is the most important thing that's often overlooked, is that the single most important thing to do in onboarding is the proper expectation of what success looks like.
Mm-hmm.
If you can tell someone, this is the goal, this is what we expect of you, and make that very clear, they'll have a much better understanding of how they can bring value to an organization, which is the thing everyone really wants to know. Besides, where's the bathroom with everyone's name, like knowing what success looks like. And that's a two-way street. We also need to know what success looks like for them. And so we created the sticky note game initially as an onboarding technique where people don't always know what's next for them or what's best in their career. They don't always have a handle on that. And I've seen, honestly, people's soul get crushed by being like, where do you want to be in 10 years? And like, who knows? Maybe I'll have kids. Maybe I won't. 10 years is too far out. Or you give like a really heavyweight HR tool, an evaluation to fill out. Now I'm doing disc profiling and everything else. So the sticky note game is the premise that expectation setting is incredibly important and that people are more important than process and tools. So you start the sticky note game in complete silence and you're in a room with 3 people with 2 different color sticky notes, the person who's new with one color, and then probably like their buddy or the sponsor and someone else who maybe does a similar function or similar role in another color. And you ask the question, let's say we're doing it for Jesse, 3 of us were in the room, we'd say, it's 6 months from now. And Jesse just killed it. Like those first 6 months were amazing. What happened? What did that look like? And then in 10 minutes, there's no one talks and just writing one idea down per sticky note. And then we started affinity mapping them. It was like, what ideas do you have? And so Jesse made something like, I ran in the Boston Marathon. So I left every day at 4 o'clock. I met with my running group and I was able to achieve this incredible milestone in my personal life. And that would be something we had no idea. So we might say, wow, okay, that's great to know. Don't put you in the Singapore project, which has different hours. And then we would say, you gave a talk at Windy City Rails and you gave a whole online, great presentation about how to refactor legacy code. And you might say like, oh my God, public speaking. I did not know that was a thing that you thought I should be doing. I've never done that before. And so when we start mapping out very clear expectations, both from the person and the company, we get a sense of where there may be gaps or where there's overlaps. And then as an employer, as a person who's looking at across everyone's sticky note games, I can see things like 5 people want to get better at JavaScript. So I can figure out who they should be pairing with. 3 people are trying to get better at facilitation. There's another ritual we have, again, rituals and storytelling, very important. When a team first gets together, they do what's called a team agreement. And everyone brings their sticky note game to the team agreement. So they might say like, listen, I really want to get better at facilitating. And so the team might say, okay, you take the next retrospective and one will tell you how you did. It allows you to create opportunities that are directly related to their growth path. But it's also easier to give someone feedback when they're blatantly asking for it. When they're like, hey, I'm trying to get better at this. This is the stuff I want to hear more about. So it makes it easier to tell someone, hey, you could have done this, you could have done that. And so we have a tradition now, where a ritual where every time someone does a sticky note game, they mail it out to the entire company. And it's amazing to see people be like, oh, me too, we should totally pair on that. Or like, hey, just even like an attaboy, like that's amazing. Keep up the good work. I can't wait to see when that happens. And it allows everyone to understand that growth is important. And so it allows people to talk about where they're going next. And the reason why I like it so much is because it's literally Sharpies and sticky notes. There's no tool you've got to license. There's no heavyweight process. You just have to carve out the time to understand what's important to people and help them figure out what their growth plans are going to bring the most value. And so we got asked about this a lot. There are probably 100 different companies now in the US that roll out sticky note games.
Yeah.
So we actually made a site about it. If you go to stickynote.game, there's a whole process of how do you facilitate it, how do you run it, how do you digitize it, how do you like do it at scale. It stopped being onboarding for us. Everyone in the company does a sticky note game every 6 months. Like that's just a thing that we do to think about growth and the evolution of people's skills.
Well, it's such an interesting, I've done a lot of interviewing of salespeople and marketing people throughout my career. And one of the most interesting things that I've noticed is you get a lot of salespeople who decide they don't like sales, and that's totally normal, but they want to move to marketing. And there tends to be a stigma associated with that. Oh, it means you failed as a salesperson. It means you sucked as a salesperson. And I've talked to a lot of junior people. I've done some stuff with some colleges locally here in the Boston area. And so I've got a lot of these kids reaching out. Can you help me? How do I talk about this? And there's one in particular I talked to a couple of weeks ago who was in sales. He was looking for some marketing. He was saying, hey, you run an agency. I know you work with a bunch of companies. You got any side help? Is there any side help you need? And I'm like, are you in sales? He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, let me tell you how to pitch me. And we had a really interesting conversation. And I feel like that sticky note game might be a really great transition for folks moving departments within, because I said, you need to go back and talk to your marketing team and make a friend and say, hey, I'm interested in learning marketing. Salespeople, if they decide they don't like sales and are really interested in marketing, can be really terrible marketers or really great marketers because they understand the plight of a salesperson. Sometimes it's because they just couldn't cut it in sales. But it would be super interesting to embrace this kind of like get rid of the stigma associated with moving departments internally to be able to, to exactly how you're talking about. If you have somebody who's interested in different departments or different roles, embrace that, teach them, train them, and move them. And I like how you're, I'm going to say normalizing it. The average person stays at a company or a job 2.5 years, if I'm not mistaken. The older you get, the shorter it is usually. In terms of roles within an organization, the average CMO stays for 18 months, which is like a drop in the hat. So it's just, I like the approach there. So
I think that intentional investment in people is worth everyone's time. Like if you know what someone's really motivated by, you know what they're trying to do next.
Yeah,
you give them opportunities to achieve it. I think that's so I think leaning into that, the sticky note game was a way to really try to be intentional about that growth and build on like everything else we talked about. Super important context building, focusing on belonging. All of those are cornerstones of any onboarding program when done well. But I feel like that additional focus on an expectation setting of what success means is the thing that most onboarding programs lack.
Yeah.
What most companies don't have insight into. They don't know what their people want to do next. So they don't know what to invest in. I think making that very explicitly clear is like a good overall mantra of a company. Take things that are generally implicit, make them very explicit. And I think the sticky note game is like a really lightweight way of doing that.
It's interesting. When we started this podcast, Varun and I had some ideas of what we'd end up talking about. We have a whole list of questions and, where we thought these conversations were going to go. And we spend the majority of time talking about people. And it like this was case in point. I mean, everybody has a different perspective. It's just so interesting to me. I don't know, Varun, I don't know if that's what you expected to, but I think the number one thing that I've noticed from talking to agency owners is how much respect we have for finding good people and keeping good people. That's what kind of drives our whole industry.
Mm-hmm.
True that. And every owner has a different approach, I think, in how they work. I mean, yes, we thought about talking about, discovery, design, deploy. I mean, I think those are more or less become more standard now, but I think it's the other thing when we hear from owners, like, with Mark, we talked about how they, approached EOS and how they implemented that within the company. I mean, I think that's an interesting and useful conversation for other owners to take away from and see how they can think about it. So it's great to have that, different
or commiserate. A lot of times, misery loves company. It's nice to hear that you're not alone in the challenge that you're facing. So, but
I think finding ways to influence your culture to do those kinds of things, like for those that are looking at the video and wondering what this crazy background of mine is, like that's another part of our company that we started making available to other companies. But how do you recognizing that people are the most important thing? How do you like effectively shape your culture and invest in your culture to make sure that you're allowing people to be heard? I think those agencies that can really build an inclusive culture where everyone's voices matter will outperform others. And as you say, like there's a concept of how do you do discovery and design development. All of that's really important. I don't want to take away from that. But those companies that really invest in culture to get the most from their people will generally do those other jobs better. So I'd be curious to see like how, in your conversations, how you have seen creative tactics that people have taken to make their companies more inclusive and have voices being heard. Has that been a frequent topic of conversation?
Yeah, because especially since when everybody being home, it changes, to your point, it changes culture so significantly. You know, we talking with, to our advantage, a lot of agencies will build differently. So, you know, when I mean build, I mean how they build the company with people. One of the fellows that we talked to, he's fully remote. Entire company's been fully remote for years. And so that was not a pivot for them when COVID happened. It just standard, you know, but his business and his hiring and how he brings people in are very different than the way that you've structured, you know, how people decide on hierarchy, what the partnership relationships and ownership relationships look like. It's even just companies working with other companies and partnering with other companies, or working with, you know, global vendors or outsourced situations. You know, it's just, they're just really interesting conversations, to be perfectly honest with you, which is great, which makes interesting podcast, I think.
Sure.
So
I've been thinking about like how, especially when people are remote, when you can't read body language, like how do you get the most from conversations and make sure you can be hearing others? So that's been something that's been on my mind, gosh, for like the last 2 years or so. I think we did a workshop in Germany where I was asking people about this and came up with this idea around these inclusion cards, around how do you focus meetings to become more inclusive and hear from other people. So like there's a benefit, especially if you have junior people in your team, to giving them the explicit permission to play this role, right? To be like,
I was going to ask if that's what it meant. Like, does this identify that you're the devil's advocate in all the conversations you're asking?
For that meeting, you might say, like, listen, I want you to play this role. So I mean, if you're a junior developer and I'm the CTO, you're probably going to smile and nod and be like, yep, that makes a lot of sense. But I might say, like, listen, I want for today you to challenge, be like, hey, devil's advocate, maybe that's not the best approach. What if we did this other thing instead? And you're not trying to be the contrarian just because you're being an asshole. You're doing it because we've asked you to play the devil's advocate. And junior members sometimes need that encouragement to be able to play that card. The opposite is true. Think about the CTO who knows where all the bodies are buried, because she probably buried them herself. Like she knows where all the challenges are. She knows why other ideas might not work. And those people can be quick to shoot an idea down and be like, okay, we can't do that because why? And so one of the things you try to give them is this kind of background. Be like, all right, you're going to be the angel's advocate. Every time says an idea, you have to lean into it and say why it might work before you shoot it down. You got to yes end things and build on other people's ideas and not just automatically say no. And if there's a person who's been around for a while, who maybe has a lot of privilege or just a lot of institutional knowledge, you might give them the explicit role of the toddler and say, like, when something comes up, I want you to be like, you know what? I don't get it. Explain it to me like I'm 5. Like, even if you do get it, other people might not get it, might be afraid of asking the really tough question. So like, just give it to me in smaller words. I'm not sure I'm following you.
Explain it to my grandma. That's the
exactly.
joke we use.
I really get it. You want to make sure that one person is making sure the meeting doesn't go upside down. So they're the one keeping track of the time and the agenda, making sure things are moving quickly. Like there are different ways you can think about how you structure a meeting to get the most from each other. Or even if you're like a CEO and you're having a conversation to a large group of people, it's nice to allow them to visually cue you, like, I want more or I want less, because you can't read body language. So if you have like that big Brady Bunch, screen of faces, you can pause, be like, all right, is everyone still there? And they can be like, yeah, tell me more. Like, I want to hear more about that. Or like, nope, zoom out. I get it. Like, I'm done. Next topic. Like, there's ways you can cue a speaker differently. And I think the hardest thing for the agency owner or the leaders is to honestly not do what I'm doing right now, is shut up and like get other voices to be heard and not be the first one to answer a question. And so I try to, like, that acronym WAIT, which stands for why am I talking? Like, just to have this be the thing. Like, I might start a dialogue and say, like, what should we be doing next year we consider a new space? And then just embrace the pause, as opposed to saying like, oh, I'm going to do this thing. What do you think? And then like takes all the oxygen out of the room. And so I think finding a way to lean into, even when you're remote, right? Even when you're distributed, leaning into building an inclusive culture where other people's voices are championed or given space is like the job of an agency owner. And oftentimes they feel like their job is to be the visionary and the luminary that has all the answers, which is ridiculous. Like they should be asking good questions and getting as much insight as they can.
Certainly. For those of you watching, you've seen Mark changing the cards behind him. For those of you listening, he's got a slew of these really cool Zoom backgrounds that keep changing with the references that he's mentioning. So that was fun. I was going to ask you what those were. I had a feeling I was going to take a guess, but
they're good. Yeah, it's
so
neat to think about how people can use that. For the folks that actually are interested in trying this, we try to figure out ways of making meetings better, which is where that meetingsdoneright.co site came from. Tips, and you can actually we actually made a card, like a physical card game that you can bring and leave in the conference room.
Cute. I love it. Well, thanks so much, Mark. This was a great call. You know, I just want to list off the places where people can find you. You said meetingsdoneright.co.
Mm-hmm.
There's walkshop.io, which we didn't touch on, but I think everyone should check it out. It's a really cool business opportunity. stickynote.game. And then you have tablexi.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're on the Twitter, Mark Rickmeier. And then LinkedIn as well. Did I miss anything in there? I think that's the short list, right?
Yep.
And OpsConf. And they'll be listed. If you look at the podcast, they'll be all listed there. So
I think for those in Chicago, we do work with Forbes often in Chicago, kind of running the business community. But for those out in the interwebs, I think that's the best place is to check me out or look at either TableXI or like places like Walkshop.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That's it, everyone. If you learned something today or laughed, tell someone about this podcast. Thanks, Varun.
Yeah.
I need a catchphrase at the end. We've been working on that. So, all right, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Yeah. Good one.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening. Find our other episodes on agencies.build.com. Plus, we're listed anywhere you find your favorite podcast.